Now we saw when we used the solver on our fruit and sales data that we had to add a single constraint in that made sure that all the values stayed as integers. Now this is the solution that we were given, and this is the original data. What you will notice is that not one of the kiwi values was changed. We sold 59, and in our solution there was 59. The other values had been changed, but nothing in the kiwis. Now, the solver didn't take into account any other constraints that we might wish to add, such as the maximum number of bananas for a whole year, or perhaps an average of apple sales, or perhaps a total pieces of fruit in January when things are very quiet. So none of those constraints have been added in. It was only told to make sure that all the values remained integers. But we could add in further constraints. So if we take our original data and create a copy of the sheet, and we'll call this data resolved 2, then we can actually run the solver again on this data, but add in a few extra constraints. Now we do have to be careful with these constraints that we don't constrain things so entirely that it cannot work out a solution. So let's start. We go to Data, Solver. Notice how it's retained the solver setting we set before, that G14 is the cell that will need changing to a value of 1500 by altering the values between B2 and F13. It's also retained the constraint about an integer. So let's add further constraint in. Now this constraint is that the banana sales must be less than or equal to 50. So we never have more than 50 in the banana column. Okay, let's add in a further constraint. This constraint is that the total number of pears must be less than or equal to 120. So that's already lower than we have at the moment. I'm going to add, because then that will bring me back to the add constraint box. And I'd like to make the total number of kiwis actually be greater than 100. So we're going to up the kiwi sales. Okay, that brings me back to the solver dialog box, and I can see my two new constraints are in place. Now we do have to be careful about adding constraints, because if we add too many, it could cause the solver to crash, or it could cause the solver never to find an actual solution. So I'm going to leave these constraints on. One, that all of the cells must be integers, that our individual banana sales cells must be less than or equal to 50, the total pears must be less than 120, and the total kiwis must be more than or equal to 100. Let's see if it can find a solution. So you can see it working away down the bottom left, running through various sub-problems and different trial solutions, and then it finds a solution. So we can see that it's made it to 100 on the kiwis. It's still reached 1500 as its target for that cell, and the pears are below 120, and not one of the banana cells is over 50. There's a few at 50, but not one is over 50. So I'm going to keep these solver options and OK. So those numbers do differ from the original and from the other resolution that we had previously because of the constraints. Now we were careful with our constraints in that we didn't place too many, therefore causing the solver not to work out a solution. It was still able to work within those parameters and produce our solution. So hopefully you can see that the solver is obviously a much better tool than GoalSeek, and by adding in constraints, you can get it to work within various parameters to produce the result that you're after.